Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Simulation Pending podcast, which is a new creation that I'm doing with three of my friends, Charlie, Emmett, and Josh. My name is Declan, an accountant by trade, a big fan of MMOs, mainly playing World of Warcraft for a very long time, and recently got into Final Fantasy with a new wave of WoW refugees, although I still play both, mainly classic WoW, because retail not as good anymore. Charlie, would you like to sound off, please?
Alrighty, I'm Charlie. I design things, and I've also been playing WoW for far too long, all the way from very casual to being way too sweaty at raiding. All sorts of MMOs. At least I've dabbled in.
Emmett?
I'm Emmett. I've been playing MMOs for quite a long time. I played in like the original vanilla WoW, and since then I've played everything from like RuneScape to Elder Scrolls Online and Guild Wars to varying degrees. And I'm a mental health clinician in my real life.
And last but not least, Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh. By day, an archaeologist, and by every other time, playing many of games. In terms of MMOs, as with the others, I have played a great deal of World of Warcraft, both a great deal of PvP and raiding, and other MMOs I have played. I've done quite a bit of Star Trek Online, and I have sunk many hours into PlanetSide 2.
With that introduction out of the way, there has been the new MMO, New World, that's just come out, and a few of us have sort of been giving it a go. But have any of you guys actually heard of anyone who's like, absolutely loving it? Because for the most part, I've sort of seen everyone be a bit lukewarm.
Yeah, I think lukewarm is probably the way I would put it. I still feel like half my Steam friends list is still playing it, but I don't know whether that's out of spite.
Well, spite seems like a weird one because it's. I want to say the new game shine is still kind of there, but I just don't know if it's going to last.
Yeah, that's the feeling I get. I haven't dabbled in it, but I've seen a little bit of what's going on, and it seems like good fun, but it seems like it sort of trickles off a little bit in terms of entertainment value.
Well, the most positive I seem to have been seeing in response in terms of positives is that people are enjoying having a new MMO of any kind, and some people have been able to find the fun where they can in the game.
I think that's probably about as good as you could put it. Like, I think everyone just wants a new MMO, and this has been the first in a while that's sort of really brought anything, or at least attempted to bring anything new to the table.
I don't think it really brings anything new to the table. Like, the big thing that I can see which is different from other MMOs is sort of the gathering that it's, and to its credit, it's very seamless to just go out, cut wood in the middle of nowhere, hunt and skin and whatnot. But otherwise, there doesn't seem like a key selling point.
Yeah, from what I've seen from the PvP, it looks cool. The war mode and the sieges and things interest me a bit, but there's all sorts of things going on in the back end that seems just difficult.
I suppose the thing is, if you want sieges and like those bigger bits of combat, you just go play World v World in Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, and I think World v World in Guild Wars does a pretty good job at the whole sort of server community, my server versus your server type thing, which I know New World is trying to do with making sure that the servers are their own thing, so you know the different guilds, you know the different players. So if you're fighting them constantly, it sort of becomes a bit of a rivalry, which I think is a great thing that has sort of fallen away in a lot of MMOs.
So in terms of bringing something new to the table, at least in the sense of big, successful MMOs, and I think it's hard to deny in the context of player numbers that New World is anything but successful for a launch.
Oh, hell yeah.
I think the combat is actually fairly unique in terms of MMOs on this scale. The fact that it is so action-oriented and so light on abilities, which some people seem to be very positive on, some people seem to be very negative on. I think that comes down to your taste in games. But that type of combat I have not seen an MMO that has had this type of player base that has done so action-oriented combat before.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here, and I'll sort of more lead the question to Emmett and Josh. But doesn't Elder Scrolls Online have fairly similar sort of action-oriented combat? Just a bit more, first person?
I wouldn't say so. Emmett, you might disagree with the time we spent in Elder Scrolls, but
I think it's definitely closer than other MMOs, but
yes.
I don't remember aiming being like a relevant part of Elder Scrolls. The big thing I've seen with New World is with guns and bows, you have to actually hit right? Rather than just like shoot in the general direction, which is what I remember Elder Scrolls being. Not 100% sure.
I would describe Elder Scrolls as the middle ground between your more traditional hotkey MMOs and something like New World, from what I've seen. It certainly had more action elements than, say, your World of Warcraft, but it was still very centered around a relatively large array of abilities tied to hotkeys. In terms of MMOs with limited ability pool but very strong action focus, I would say the closest thing to New World is in fact Destiny.
Yeah, I think in some ways, yeah, I probably agree. That's what really bamboozled me. It was just how few active abilities there are. There just seemed like an array of abilities, but not.
Well, it's all combo based, isn't it?
Oh, it's not really combo based. You sort of just have 3 abilities: a light and a heavy attack on at least melee weapons. Ranged weapons are just, shoot them. But otherwise, you have 2 skill trees that you can sort of mix and match from. But early on, I don't think it doesn't look like it incentivizes you to really split your talent points, because you want to get to that sort of big ability at the very end, because it's like, for the Hatchet Berserker, I just don't die for whatever period of time when I take lethal damage, which is huge. So that's why there's nothing really in axe throwing that would sort of incentivize me to put points into there when I can go down that talent tree first.
Yeah, because you have like the Berserker and then like the axe throwing. There's different trees.
Yeah.
And I think like with Guild Wars, like it's similar to Guild Wars in that like your abilities are based off your weapon.
Yeah.
But Guild Wars is heaps more like.
Yeah, because not only in Guild Wars is it your weapon, but like
your race and
both your weapons. Like if you're dual wielding, you get like half of your abilities from your main hand, the other half from your offhand. And then you obviously have all your class abilities secondary to all of that. So yeah, I think the combat seems really interesting, and from what I've seen, the PvP is great fun. But it's those moments in between that I've heard can be a little bit lackluster.
The travel it does it gets very dull very quickly, and I have no idea why there aren't any mounts. And I'm pretty sure the devs have come out and they've pretty much done a blanket no. We are not adding mounts.
At least what I've looked at is the adventure in the game is great, but it's only great to the point that you come across a place you've already been, and then you're just running on foot for minutes or hours on end.
Yeah, and to an extent, like not even that. Like at least with the starting zones, like the starting zones are different. Like they're different like aesthetics, but the quest line, I did half my quest line in one area, and then I went over to Declan's area, and like it's the same quest line, like identical, even though you're in different starting zones. So it's like, yeah, it looks different, but you're not actually doing anything different. You're still like picking up truffles from pigs. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can't share quests either, can you?
No, I don't believe so.
So you're constantly trying to figure out what each other is doing if you're trying to play with friends, at least.
Yeah, and I don't think you can abandon quests either. I tried to do that, but all I could do was reset the quest, which was interesting, but I couldn't abandon it.
And I'm sure the questing system at least has got a lot of work that is going to go into it, because as far as I know, the questing system as a whole only really came into the game earlier this year, when you really think about it. Up until that point, the game was really just supposed to be the MMO or sandbox survival game, essentially. It really wasn't until late last year, early this year, that they really sort of started to think, okay, we're going to turn this into a real, well, quote-unquote real MMO. More along the lines of a more modern style MMO, at least.
I think that's the core issue with New World, is that the New World that we know, the development time that's actually been put into it is surprisingly short in comparison to a lot of other games, which really comes out in how shallow it is. I will give them points that it is very functional. I haven't come across any like major bugs or glitches or anything.
Yeah.
That in itself is impressive for a new game.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the main things I was sort of disappointed in, I guess, was at least when it was early in talks, like over a year ago, if not longer, it was all about the sort of fairly hardcore PvP, which obviously puts a lot of people off. But that element really sort of piqued my interest with how your guild can hold different locations and different towns and so on and so forth, and you can battle over territory. But that all very quickly fell away when it came into the public eye, and they potentially realized that a hardcore PvP survival MMO wasn't necessarily what the masses wanted, even if that's what they were originally designing the game for.
There do seem to still be some elements of that in the game in terms of territory control, in terms of that larger scale Perhaps not quite to the degree they were initially talking about, but at least in the sense that groups and factions and companies can own territory. And I know they can do things like setting rent rates and various other elements to towns they control, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is all things that I think like player-driven economies are one thing, but player-owned and controlled areas of the world is a completely other thing that I still think hasn't been done in a big AAA, essentially, mainstream MMO as of yet. Obviously, you have things like Albion Online that are doing similar things, but I just don't think it's been fully achieved. And I think this game probably could have done that, but it may not have reached the player numbers that it has now, which I guess is probably in their minds the right decision.
Well,
considering they had like 1 million active players on Steam or something like that.
Well, doesn't EVE do something relatively similar to the whole sort of controlling territory, having a bit more economic interest in that way?
Yeah.
EVE is kind of the ultimate example of that, in terms of most of the universe is player corporation owned and controlled, and every aspect of that space is defined by the players. There are practically no NPCs in the traditional sense in that space. There are areas of NPC control, but they are relatively small. So EVE has certainly done that. I'm not sure that EVE is something that can ever be copied or reproduced. It could certainly be a template for elements of games in that sense. But EVE, I think, still to this day stands out as a rather unique MMO and game in general.
Oh, incredibly. EVE's like a job.
Well, you don't become, multiple percents of the GDP of, what is it, Iceland that EVE is a part of? Yeah, without being a pretty hefty experience. Although you did also just mention, though, that they had 1 million at launch, which is a very, very good launch for a new MMO, considering the days of getting subscription numbers like Wrath of the Lich King WoW, did it peak at 12 million, I think it was?
I think it peaked right at
13.
I think it peaked right at the start of Cataclysm and then very quickly tipped off.
Yeah, those numbers are almost impossible to reach again, I don't think.
Oh yeah,
not for a single MMO.
There's just too many games on the market, not just MMOs, but everything. There was a time period where if you were playing games, you were probably playing WoW.
The nature of MMOs is you need to sort of have people bring others in as well, I feel. Because obviously, it's a massively multiplayer game. You want it to be social. So, if you have your base in another game, like if you've got a WoW guild that's really good, you're not going to just bugger off and play another game.
Yeah, it's another good point as to, in relation to New World, is all the people I know who are playing it with a group of friends they've either known for a long time or have played other games with, potentially other MMOs. So I think it's a big thing within MMOs to jump to different things with the same group of people. And that's probably where you get most of your longevity. I know that's definitely where I got most of my longevity in WoW and any other MMO that I've played.
But I think that actually sort of goes, that you have to have a reason to play pretty much any game, obviously, and there's entertainment value. So for an MMO, a big part of it normally is the social aspect, or you want to play for a story. But honestly, I reckon, considering New World just sort of doesn't excel at anything over much, I reckon you'll have a look at your Steam list, and you'll slowly start seeing friends peter back to games that they're already playing. Either they go back to play Classic, they go back to play Retail WoW. They were on the Final Fantasy train. Guild Wars 2 with the new expansion coming up. I don't think it's going to live in the long term.
Yeah, and I think that they definitely, it's got such a foundation of what, and my brain just keeps going to what it could be. And I think that if they do everything that they will hopefully do, it could turn into a really incredibly cool game. It's just that it's gone through so much development hell of bouncing back and forth of what is this game, what is it going to be, that it's still at the point where it doesn't really know what it's going to be yet. And hopefully it definitely gets to that point. And a part of me hopes that it does go back and maybe a tiny bit more in line with that hardcore sort of PvP survival MMO that focuses on territory control and things like that. But who knows?
That really would be a good selling point because, like I sort of mentioned before, if you sort of want that experience before, you would go to Guild Wars 2, whereas this is in the real world. The worldly world in Guild Wars it's like an instance, it's a separate thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas controlling towns on the map it impacts players off the bat. You go to the first town, it's controlled by a guild.
Exactly. You could sort of come straight off the tutorial and walk into somewhere where you're getting taxed or something like that, or rent rates or whatever you were talking about before. But all those elements are so interesting, and I think that's why so many people are probably excited for Ashes of Creation, in that it's talking about doing all of these things. But as we know with a lot of games, everyone wants to do a bit of everything, and you can't make a game with everything.
I suppose that's actually kind of an interesting point with Ashes of Creation, because it was like a lot of the features that the people were kind of iffy about in New World, they're really excited about in Ashes of Creation, because that's still one of the most hyped MMOs that's going to be coming out.
Yeah, well, I think if and when, I guess, it comes out, which I imagine is probably not for quite some time, it'll be interesting to see how it all comes to fruition. But at least at the moment, with everything that they're showing, it's certainly showing to be a little bit of everything, and at least a little bit of a new take on what an MMO can look like.
They did a, not like a free trial, but they did a beta recently, didn't they?
They had an alpha, I believe, like a closed alpha, which people said was, everything worked well. I think the big one that people are still quite worried about with it is the combat system, because they're trying to do a hybrid of New World / tab targeting ability-based combat. And I think that the general consensus, at least from what I've seen, is that it's still not quite there. They need to do more work to get the combat system fixed, or pleasurable to play, for lack of a better word.
It does sound like a unique way of doing things, but there's also something to just be said for just click and kill.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you want to go hybrid, then Guild Wars 2 does a damn good job of being hybrid. Like, it's obviously closer to just tab targeting in general, but you've still got those elements of, if I face the enemy, I will hit them when I press this button.
And even more like, say you have a two-handed hammer. If you sort of position yourself appropriately, when you do a swing, you can hit multiple people at the same time.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's probably the closest to the hybrid system that I've seen be like really, really good. But hopefully Ashes can pull it off as well, even if they do have to lean further towards one or the other direction.
Oh, no doubt. And I reckon if they get the combat sort of sorted out, or at least it's to a point where it's like, yeah, it's okay, the other elements of the game is what's going to really sell it.
Yeah, 100%. But sort of pulling back the New World type of thing, Emmett, like how far did you get in like the new player experience?
Like, it was actually pretty frustrating once I realised what was actually going on. So I know myself and you, Declan, we both started one character and we were doing it on like a high pop realm, and like the queues were just like crazy. And so we played a little bit and we thought, look, if we're going to play this over a few days, may as well pick one of the more like empty servers, right? So we can get on without waiting 45 minutes. And we both picked like just an empty server. And what we quickly found out was that despite the fact that we had just like started the game, the starting zones are randomized and they're like significant distances away from each other through like very high level areas. So like I had to be like level 12 or 13 before I could make that trek to Declan's starting zone. And like it took me like 25 minutes or whatever. And it was just pretty crappy, really.
Yeah, well, I guess it's that if you are trying to play with someone else, it becomes very difficult. And I'm almost certain that type of mechanic or that sort of implementation of how you start is almost certainly left over from when it was originally going to be a survival game. It's like things like Rust. You spawn in on the server and you spawn in with your friend. You have to try and find your friend first to then make a group to then hopefully go do things. It's like it's being pulled in so many different directions of what it's trying to be. The things that it was going to be in the past are still there now, but it's not trying to be that anymore. So those things are like at odds with what it's trying to be now. It just sort of doesn't flow well and creates this awkward sort of game loop.
Well, that's it, right? The starting quests are actually pretty good. I found it was pretty interesting, but yeah, it was just like, oh, you want to play with a friend? Oh, sorry.
I think
that's just not what you want to get.
The other annoying thing was that, like, we discovered pretty quickly, because I think we tried the other server, we got on eventually. Then we went onto the low pop one, went onto the beach, realized, oh, this is slightly different, and then realized, oh wait, it's not just another random NPC you're talking to, it's literally just a copy pasted zone. Which seems like a bit of a cop out because there's only.
So the starting zone is copy-pasted in each of the randomized starting areas?
More or less. The environment's slightly different, but the quests are exactly the same. The enemies are exactly the same.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, everything is the same except people's names. Like, the quest givers' names are different. But, like, everything else is identical. And it's just, I mean, yeah, it definitely does feel like, oh, let's turn Rust into an MMO, right? And then let's not actually fix up all the stuff we did.
It's like let's turn Rust into an MMO, but then halfway down the line we go, maybe we shouldn't have been doing this. Maybe we should just make a normal MMO, but we'll just leave all the other things that we had in.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Right, and yeah, it just sucked, really. And that, apparently the experience we had there was better than what it used to be. How it used to be was that if you accepted the main quest, so accepted it, so you hand in like your, I've just washed up Hello Adventurer quest. If you accept the next quest, you weren't able to quest in any of those zones until you completed the quest chain, which got you to like level 25, which was, I don't know, that's like 25 hours of play, 20 hours play.
Yeah, wow.
But that is slightly better now, where you just like, as long as you don't have a quest, you can just pick it up from where it was.
Yeah,
at the next zone.
Which kind of shows just how sort of copy-pasted the whole setup is, that you can just go to the other starting zone and pick up exactly where you left off.
Yeah.
But I think a big part of the fact that a lot of the development happened in the last 10, 12 months.
I mean, particularly in those core gameplay loops of leveling, most of that obviously happened fairly recently.
Because you choose a faction pretty early on, and there's the Vanguard, the Covenant, and the sneaky boys. But it's very forgettable. That's the frustrating thing, because there's just no real story going on. Like, it's a spooky island.
And that's one of the other things is like I don't think the story was, at least in a storytelling capacity, was ever supposed to be fleshed out in the way that it's being at the moment, or at least attempted to be in the moment, because it was always supposed to be that here you are, washed up on an island, can you survive?
That was certainly the biggest thing that didn't draw me to the game, was the setting and story, because that, for me, in terms of MMOs, that is almost always one of the biggest factors, is your setting, your story, your character. I mean, that is why I was so into WoW for so long, because I was already a big fan of that world and of those characters. And so being able to play through that story was a huge thing for me. And at least from the advertising, the seeming lack of a story to New World, coupled with the fact that the sort of age of exploration, age of discovery setting is not one that captures my interest as an aesthetic or as a time period, was a huge downside for me.
I wonder when they actually chose that aesthetic, because it is a fairly niche one. You don't see many games in sort of that age of discovery.
It seems to be becoming more popular. I'm seeing more and more things set in that sort of period, and I think it's maybe a development from things like Bloodborne and some more of that almost like aesthetic. It's along the same sort of lines. There certainly seem to be more games in that setting recently than it seems to me like we might be in for that being the in thing for a while.
That, at least that aesthetic, that little bit more painterly, grungy sort of style that New World's definitely doing, and that you see in probably to a more extreme degree in things like Bloodborne and Dark Souls.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen quite a number of people who are really into that aesthetic and that setting. So it's definitely not necessarily a bad thing. It was just, for me, it's not something that really captures my attention or interest.
Yeah, exactly. But one big thing I was looking at, or at least that I'd been hearing about, because people have been blowing up about New World ever since it sort of came out, but there was a big thing in that their report system and their ban system is a little bit undercooked, to say the least. Apparently it's just, if you get reported X number of times, you get banned for 24 hours. So there's been all these reports of like people figuring out, like, if you're about to siege some other guild's town or some other company's town, you find out who their guild leader is, or so on and so forth, and just spam report them until they get banned for 24 hours and they can't defend. So there's a bunch of stuff like that going around that is only doing really bad things for the longevity of the game, because that can only happen so many times until people just quit.
Especially the company leaders, because they're the sort of people you want to keep there, because they keep the community around them. And something like in New World where you have the sieges, you miss a siege, you've missed that siege.
Yeah, and if you lose, you've lost. Your company no longer holds that town, so you don't get all the benefits, and you have to try and get it back, I guess. And
then it gets into your head that, okay, well, if they're going to cheat, I'm going to have to cheat back, and you get all those together. And
even if it's not that, it's if they're going to cheat, well, what's the point in us even trying to hold this town? And then you just fade away into the history books of companies that once did things.
which is not
Play dirty or don't play.
the annoying sort of thing as well. There's a lot of annoying things when it comes to New World, but one definitely sort of has to be the pace of leveling, because you sort of seem to have, at any given time, you're leveling 4 things. Your 2 weapons, or actually 5, your 2 weapons, all of your gathering skills while you're out in the world, you have your own XP, and then you have zone XP as well, which is independent of each zone that you go to, and you sort of get talent points for that zone standing, I think it's called, where it's like, oh, you get extra gathering rate in this zone, or extra, zone XP rate, and a bunch of other little things. So there's a bunch of systems to help you gain power, but it tapers off very quickly, and there's no real way of getting more experience other than doing pretty basic quests, which sort of continue the story of go from A to B, or you do your faction quests, and you pretty much have 3 PvE and 3 PvP options. I haven't tried any of the PvP options because, we're at a stage already where there's very high levels out in the world, and I don't know if you flag for PvP, if there is any protections against that. Like, can you just get ganked in Monarch's Bluff, the starting zone, if you have PvP enabled? Because I imagine it's similar to PvP flag in WoW, where you go to a capital city, you turn it on, and then anyone can kill you when you're in a contested zone. So that's out of the 6 faction quests, there's only 3 that are really available, and I think I went to the same place like 3 times for 3 separate sets of quests. It was the same run each and every time, same enemies on the way. It's mind-bogglingly sort of just dull.
Yeah, and I think that's the questing system just sounds so undercooked, and just that it was never really supposed to be that, but now it is that, and it's not really there. The soul of it isn't there.
It truly is an Amazon MMO.
Yeah, well, it's like from what I've seen, the PvP and everything is incredibly fun and incredibly well done, and that's almost certainly because that's what the game was always supposed to be. It's only all these other things that become very awkward and very sort of disjointed and don't feel right, and that's because those things were all, for lack of a better term, second thoughts. They were only put in to try and appease the masses of MMO players, whereas all the core game mechanics that people enjoy, like the PvP and the combat, for all the, even though it has its times where it's not as good, but it just doesn't work because it's trying to be too many different things.
Well, I guess the question then becomes, can they develop through that? Can they take it to a place where those are good? Because most of the positive responses and positive feedback I've been seeing on the game has been, as you say, about the PvP, about the end game, and about the crafting.
Yeah,
those seem to be the greatest strengths of the game, and as you said, those are the things that have been around the longest. And
they were probably the core pieces of the game originally, I assume.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
The question then is has the game made enough money now? Because we can all assume it has made a lot at this point. Can they develop it now through that? What will the game look like in 6 months, 1 year? Are those problems solvable in a reasonable span of time? Because I think that's where the game will really potentially come into its own or crumble, is what they now do with what has arguably been a very successful launch despite all of the issues.
Yeah, 100%. I think 100% they can definitely develop through where they're at now and get to a point where the game is like everything flows together properly. It's just a question of like I don't think they'll ever backtrack and go back to making it a survival hardcore PvP MMO. I don't think they'll go back to that. But I do think that they do have the option and probably the resources to be able to fix the story, fully flesh out the story, create like quests that are meaningful and like entertaining to play through, and also create more content that follows the more traditional MMO sort of framework, whether that's more dungeons and raid equivalents or things like that fit more in line with something that's going to be built around story than it is going to be built around surviving, I suppose.
I'd love if they did something like a Paradox DLC kind of thing where they'll have a bunch of fundamental changes to the game. Say they do an expansion on, okay, we're focusing on the story, we're going to flesh it out, really make you sort of enjoy it. And then for those who paid for the DLC, the climaxes and everything are in a separate zone, like a little island just off the way that we're now getting to explore and check out. as the sort of culmination of the story, or have another one focused entirely on the PvP aspects of it. So I think they can't just sort of add an extra little layer of paint onto everything each coming expansion. I think they do need to actually laser focus, just get one part of it really, really good, and then move on from there.
Yeah, 100%.
Although on the business model, I will give them tons of credit. Like, it was what, 57 Aussie bucks? Like,
yeah, it is pretty good value for what you're getting. Like, no sub.
I mean, that's the thing, it's no sub. I wouldn't go so far as I say to say I've got value for my money. I already went out, started playing Classic and Final Fantasy again. But I reckon, like, it's good that it's going to sit there, so when new stuff does come out, I can sort of duck in and be like, oh, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, and I think it's also potentially a driving factor in why so many people are playing it as well, is because, okay, it's a new MMO, one-time purchase, and then I've got it. So I can jump on, I can play for a week, and then I can be done. I can jump on, play for a month, and then be done. And I'm not out of pocket any extra money. And if I want to come back, I don't have to fork out any extra money. I think it's definitely a big factor in why I think it's probably done pretty damn well.
Because money is just a huge factor in general when it comes to games, considering there are just so many games that are coming out, especially now that sort of COVID sort of calmed down a bit, so everything's sort of starting to release in the last little bit. And for a lot of people, when it comes to subscription games, you can't really have, say, two subs going.
No, exactly.
30, 40 bucks a month, a couple of games is...
It's like you pay if you were to be paying for WoW and something else, that adds up very quickly.
I think it's pretty well established at this point that subscription-based is not a sustainable method for the vast majority of games unless you have enough people who have sunk enough cost, like a WoW. I'm trying to think of any other game that is still subscription-based at this point.
Final Fantasy is.
RuneScape membership, bro.
Yeah, RuneScape membership.
Right, so it's your ones that have been around for a long time and have that ongoing. I cannot imagine a new game coming out as subscription-based and being able to compete with those existing ones.
I think the new subscription is battle passes or the equivalent of something like that. That is the new subscription model. And I guess, I mean, in reality, it's essentially the same thing. It's most of them are $10 to $15. So it's not like it's that different, but it's always better for it to be an option than for it to be a necessity. And most of the time, if you're paying for a battle pass or something like that, you feel like you're getting an extra sort of bonus. Whereas with regular subscription, it's just I pay $15 a month to have access.
I think it's battle pass and microtransactions more generally, because when WoW and Final Fantasy were first starting, I don't even think the infrastructure to have microtransactions was really available.
They had been conceived of in any major fashion when those came out.
Yeah, I think the other thing with, like, you look at RuneScape or you look at WoW and you look at other things that still have subscription services is, I guess at least for your own thought process, you're getting a little bit extra, even if you don't use it. It's like if you pay for WoW, you get WoW Classic and retail. If you pay for RuneScape, you get RuneScape 3, you get old school RuneScape. You're gaining access to a little bit more than just the one thing like it used to be. And I think that's almost certainly a product of the fact that people just aren't paying for subscription games anymore, or not nearly as much as they used to.
Really, New World is an MMO that's going to be interesting in the long term. I don't necessarily think there's enough in it at the moment to keep me playing. Like, I think at this point I'm going to just have it. It's going to sit in the stream library. Like, Amazon already has my $60. But
yeah, I think it's like many sort of fledgling MMOs. There's a lot of potential there, but it just needs time to figure it out. And I think the first thing is picking a direction. They need to pick whether they want to be a sandbox theme park MMO like WoW, or whether they want to be a more hardcore orientated PvP focused like Conquest MMO. And I think either one can be done very well. I don't think either of them are necessarily the right or the wrong choice.
I reckon because Amazon is backing this game, it'll have the money to actually develop itself. Because I feel a lot of fledgling MMOs have like an alright launch and then just
peter off
and die because they don't have the money. But Amazon has literally all the money, so
literally every bit of it.
I'm surprised they don't have their own currency yet. So I am hopeful for the game to get better. You know, it's going to be a game that I have a tab on, but I'm not opening up to play. Because have you even opened it up, Charlie? Because did you actually buy it?
No, I didn't end up picking it up. I've had a full week.
You can shill yourself a little bit if you'd like, considering you've been doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, on top of just work in general, obviously trying to do more map making for Oakenrest and just keep working on that. I managed to get, hopefully be putting in the order for all the t-shirt printing to come through, and then I just have to keep finishing the writing element of the book. Most of the drawing's done, most of the illustration's done. It's really just the content. Well, the finishing touches on the content, I suppose. But it should be good. Hopefully I can get it out by the end of next month, get it sent off. Knowing the way the postal system is going at the moment, it's going to take fucking ages. So,
but that's just the way of things. You'll send it out, you'll
exactly.
Done your formal obligation.
There's no real once I've sent it, everyone understands, or at least hopefully everyone understands that mail is cooked at the moment, especially international. So.
Although, Emmett, Josh, have any final words or conclusions on New World?
Oh, not really. Like, I'm kind of in a similar boat to you. Like, I hope that things get better. I'm not holding my breath. I think there's a lot. It's got a good base to the game, and I think, I mean, yeah, they obviously have the financial power to get it into a better spot. But I mean, the question, like, you don't just throw money at something to make it better. Like, do they have the actual intent to make it better, or are they going to double down on whatever they're doing at the moment? Because I think, I don't know, like, there's got to be some. I think a whole lot of small changes would revolutionize the game.
Yeah,
it's just whether or not they're willing to make them.
Yeah, willing, and even like have the creative power to do it. Right, like. The game doesn't inspire. It does not spark joy. And I mean, this is the thing when, like, I don't know how this game was made, but it feels like it was just like printed, right, rather than like lovingly crafted. And I mean, without like a vision, if they just like listen to the player base, like, players ask for dumb shit, right? And if you give it to them, they'll hate it, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, we'll see.
I think generally I'm actually quite positive, having seen where New World is at, even though it's had a successful but shaky start, and it's certainly, as it stands now, it's not a game for me, but I think they've got the money behind them, and I think they've got enough players in that even if they see a big loss in players, they will be able to make something good out of this. I think for the first time in years, this is a new MMO that has launched that will be with us for some time.
Yeah.
This will be on those lists of, these are MMOs that are still around, and look at how they're continuing to improve and develop. And I think New World will stick around for at least some time. I think the bigger thing for me is it's now clear just how much demand there is for new MMOs.
I think that's almost the biggest takeaway. I agree.
With not the failure, but the slow heat death of WoW, because of all sorts of reasons that we won't get into at the moment.
That'd be an entire podcast in itself.
Yes, and I think we could all talk at length about where WoW is at these days, but it has left a void. It was around for so long, and so many people tried to mimic the success and failed because it was still around. Now that it's gone, we haven't seen a lot of MMOs come out since then. We've seen some expansions, and things like Final Fantasy have taken off because of those expansions. But I think New World is the first time it should be very clear to developers, and I know there are already a lot in the works, but it should be absolutely clear now that people want a new MMO.
People are desperate.
And I'm hopeful that New World is the start of a new period where we actually see lots of MMOs released. We've been in quite a dry spell for probably 5 years now, at least, where we just haven't seen new MMOs in a big way, in the way that we saw for that period around Wrath, 2012 to 2015 maybe, when there were lots of, and a lot of them were very good, but they couldn't stand up to WoW.
Yeah, they couldn't stand up to WoW at that point in time.
Yeah. And so I'm hopeful that this is a sign that we are going back to actual, because there is so much room in the MMO genre for development and iteration and new ideas.
Yeah.
And New World, at the very least, is having a go at those, which I think is really good. It's not trying to be a clone of anything. It is trying to be its own thing. And I see that as a really good sign for MMOs over the next few years.
I reckon that's the thing. The future is bright. Even though at the moment it is definitely still early days, I am hopeful. For the industry at large, as like you said, 'cause with Ashes of Creation in the work, the MMO genre, I think, is making a comeback.
100%.
And with that, we've recorded the first episode. This is a bit of a post-cast outro, as I've realised in hindsight that we didn't actually do a proper outro with everyone. As you can tell, we are abject professionals, but we're looking to make this a monthly series. It's going to keep improving in quality. I'm going to keep posting it here, and I'm also looking to get it onto Spotify. So I would appreciate that you subscribe, like, and do all the standard stuff that you need to do to sort of help keep yourself in the loop for future videos. I really appreciate you spending your time listening to us, and I hope you do so in the future. Until then, have an absolutely wonderful day.